wide range. For instance,
Okay. Wait a minute. Hi, እንዴት ናችሁ? ደህና ናችሁ ወይ? የዩቲዩብ ተማሪዎች ተከታታዮች የክላውድ ኮምፒውቲንግ የምትማሩ ወይም ፈተና ልትዘጋጁ የምትፈልጉ እንዴት ናችሁ? አሁን ደግሞ እስቲ አብረን እናጠናለን። AWS ሰርቲፋይድ ዴቨሎፐር አሶሺየት ኦፊሻል ፕራክቲስ እንዘጋጃለን እና በባለፈው ቪዲዮዎች ጥያቄዎቹን ለመስራት እየሞከርን ነበር አብረን ከኔም ጋር። እኔም የመጀመሪያዬ ነው ይህን ኤግዛም ስሞክር። እስቲ ከዛ በፊት ምናልባት አዲስ ከሆናችሁ ክላውድ ኮምፒውቲንግ ምንድን ነው የሚለውን አብረን እኔ በቀላሉ በቻት ጂፒቲ ተጋግዘን እንማራለን። ክላውድ ኮምፒውቲንግ ምንድን ነው የሚለውን ሲምፕል በሆነ መልኩ እንድትገልጽልን እንጠይቃታለን እስቲ ቻት ጂፒቲን። ከዛ እንሄዳለን። ኦኬ so can you restart? What is cloud computing at all? Tell me, as I am a new beginner that doesn't know anything about cloud computing. I just use my computer day to day for reading, for watching movie, maybe for studying, for exams. So help me understand.
Of course, let's start from the very basics. Cloud computing is basically using the internet to access computing resources like servers, storage, and applications instead of relying solely on your personal computer. So rather than having to own and maintain powerful hardware, you can just use resources provided by cloud service providers like AWS, Google Cloud, or Microsoft Azure. In simple terms, if you think of your computer as just one small part of the whole ecosystem, cloud computing lets you tap into a vast network of resources that can scale up or down as needed. It means you can run complex applications, store large amounts of data, and access powerful computing power without needing to own all that hardware yourself. So as a beginner, it's like having a virtual computer that you can access from anywhere, and it makes things much more flexible and cost effective. Hopefully that gives you a good starting point.
Okay, what did we use before cloud computing came? Like what do we use it for now, and then what were we using before? And then just tell me from a day-to-day life of, let's say, healthcare worker or any computer or tech information technology professional. What did he use or they used before cloud came? And what did cloud make it easier? How did it help? Just get me in touch with the core thing, that what it did.
Absolutely. Let's break it down with a practical example. Before cloud computing, in the past, if you were, say, a healthcare worker or an IT professional, you would rely heavily on physical servers and on-premises infrastructure. For example, in healthcare, patient records would be stored on local servers within servers. You can simply access secure, scalable resources over the internet. This means you can store and retrieve patient data from anywhere, collaborate across multiple locations seamlessly, and scale up resources as needed without buying new hardware. It also means less downtime, better security, and more flexibility. In summary, cloud computing simplifies things, reduces costs, and allows professionals to focus more on their work and less on managing infrastructure.
Okay, so what services are provided through the cloud? And if the cloud wasn't here, does that mean that I have to install all the softwares on my computer? Is that what it means? Or is it a matter of accessing data remotely or in person? Is that what it is?
Exactly, you've got it. So cloud services come in a few main categories. One, infrastructure as a service, IaaS. This provides virtualized computing resources over the internet. Instead of buying and maintaining physical servers, you can rent them from a cloud provider. This is like having virtual computers that you can scale up or down as needed. Two, platform as a service, PaaS. This provides a platform allowing developers to build, deploy, and manage applications without worrying about the underlying infrastructure. It's like having a ready-made environment where you can focus on
Okay, so how financially, what is the benefit of cloud computing for companies? How does it help with like financially, money saving wise or money uh, revenue increasing side? Can you elaborate on that in details and give me like some examples, okay?
Absolutely. So, cloud computing brings several financial benefits to companies. Let me break it down. Reduce capital expenses. Instead of investing heavily in physical hardware and data centers, companies can leverage cloud services on a pay as you go basis. This means no large upfront investments in hardware, and instead, you only pay for what you use. This dramatically reduces capital expenditures. Two, scalability and flexibility. Cloud services allow companies to scale their resources up or down based on demand. This means that during peak times, you can quickly add resources and then scale back down when things are slower, which means you only pay for what you actually need. This flexibility can prevent over provisioning and reduce costs. Three, operational efficiency. Cloud providers handle maintenance, updates, and security, which means companies don't need to invest as much in IT staff and resources. This can lead to significant cost savings and allows teams to focus on innovation rather than maintenance. Disaster recovery and backup. Cloud services often include built-in backup and disaster recovery solutions. This reduces the financial impact of data loss and ensures business continuity without needing to invest in separate expensive infrastructure. Five, global reach and market expansion. Cloud computing allows companies to deploy services and applications in multiple regions easily, reducing the cost and time needed to expand into new markets. A startup can launch its application on the cloud without needing to invest in expensive hardware. This lowers the barrier to entry and allows them to be agile and cost effective. Large enterprises, a large company can use cloud services to run analytics on big data without having to invest in and maintain massive data centers. This can lead to more informed business decisions and ultimately more revenue. In short, cloud computing helps companies save money by reducing capital expenditures, lowering operational costs, and providing the flexibility to scale and innovate more effectively.
Okay, so let's continue with the ኤግዛማችን እንግዲህ ክላውድ ኮምፒውቲንግ አዲስ ለሆናችሁ በኢንተርኔት ሶፍትዌር ኢንፍራስትራክቸር እና ፕላትፎርም ማግኘት ማለት ነው። ኢንፍራስትራክቸር ማለት እንደ ኮምፒውተር ቨርቹዋል ኮምፒውተር ማለት ነው። ፕላትፎርም ማለት ደግሞ የሆነ ሶፍትዌር ቢኖራችሁ ሶፍትዌራችሁን የምጭኑበት ኤሪያ እንደማለት ነው። ከዛ ሶፍትዌር ራሱ ደግሞ ያው ኢንተርኔት ውስጥ ያለን ሶፍትዌር ወይም ክላውድ ውስጥ ያለን ሶፍትዌር መጠቀም ማለት ነው። ሰው በዲቴል ሌላ ጊዜ በዚህ ዙሪያ ብቻ ይዤ እቀርባለሁ። ዛሬ ወደ ኤግዛም ፕሪፕ ላይ መሄድ ስላለብን እና AWS the biggest cloud provider ነው። ኤአይ ሰርቪሶችም አሉት፣ ኮምፒት ሰርቪስ አለው፣ ስቶሬጅ አለው፣ ዳታቤዝ አለው፣ ኔትወርኪንግ አለው፣ ኤአይም አለው ማለት ነው። AWS እና የ9 ወር ኮርስ አለው ከአንድ እስከ 1 ዓመትም የሚፈጅ ኮርስ ክላውድ ዴቨሎፐር የሚባል ክላውድ አፕሊኬሽን ዴቨሎፐር የሚባል ኮርስ አለው። ያን ኮርስ ከወሰዳችሁ በኋላ ኤግዛም ወስዳችሁ ሰርቲፋይድ መሆን የሚችሉበት AWS ሰርቲፋይድ ዴቨሎፐር አሶሺየት የሚባል ኤግዛም አለ። እንግዲህ አይቲ ውስጥ ክላውድ ውስጥ በሄልዝ ኬርም ካላችሁ እዛው አይቲ ውስጥ ካላችሁ ፋይናንስ ውስጥም ካላችሁ ኢንሹራንስ፣ ባንኪንግ፣ ሜዲካል የተለያየ ዲሲፕሊን ውስጥ እኔ ዲሲፕሊን ውስጥ ጥቅም የሚሰጥ አገልግሎት የሚሰጥ ኤሪያ ስለሆነ ክላውድ ኮምፒውቲንግ እና ኤአይ ማወቁ የተሻለ ነው፣ ይጠቅማልና እስቲ ይሄን ኤግዛም እንዘጋጅ ማለት ነው አብረን። ኦኬ ሪዚዩም እንበልና ስንት ነበር ባለፈው? ዛሬ 10ዋን እንኳን ብንሰራ ደስ ይለኛል። እየጀመርን እያቋረጥን ስለሆነ ስታርት። ኦኬ እና 6ኛ ላይ ነን። እሺ a developer builds an application that uses AWS SDK software development kit for Python Boto 3 to query an Amazon DynamoDB table. When the application is tested on an Amazon EC2 instance, the application returns this error message. An error occurred or access denied when calling the operation. The EC2 instance is associated with an existing IAM role named my role. Which set of actions would resolve this error? I have no idea. ይሄ ጥያቄ ምን እንደሚጠይቅ ራሱ ምንድነው ማረጋው? Okay. I'm gonna copy and paste it on ChatGPT and tell me like I am beginner and explain using analogies what the question is asking me. እንልና ካመጣልን በኋላ ላውድ ስፒከር ላይ አድርገን ራሱ እንድን
All right, let's unpack this question gently, like we're opening a box step by step.
Okay.
What is this question actually asking? A developer created an application that uses Boto3 Python library to read data from DynamoDB, a NoSQL database on AWS. They ran this application on an EC2 instance, a virtual server in the cloud. But instead of working, AWS returned this message. Open quote, access denied. You are not allowed to do that action. Close quote. So the question is, why is the app not allowed to access DynamoDB, and how do we fix it? Real life analogy. Imagine, you, the app, want to enter a library room, DynamoDB table. The security guard at the door, AWM, stops you. You show your ID card, IAM role, attached to EC2. The guard checks your card and says, open quote, sorry, your ID does not give permission to enter this room, close quote. You must update the permissions on your ID card so you're allowed to access the library. Key concepts in the QuestWS item real-life meaning, EC2 instance, a computer server you're using, IAM role, your badge ID card, my role, the name printed on your badge, DynamoDB, the library where information is stored, access denied, the guard saying not allowed, Boto3, your tool to talk to DynamoDB, what needs to be done, the fix. To solve the issue, you must give the IAM role, my role, the correct permissions to access DynamoDB. Correct set of actions. 1. Add an IAM policy to the role, my role, that allows DynamoDB actions like DynamoDB get item, DynamoDB query, DynamoDB scan, to attach this policy to the IAM role used by the EC2 instance. 3. Optional. Make sure the policy includes the correct table name and region. Why does this work? AWS is secure by default. Just because your EC2 instance has a role does not mean that role automatically has permission to touch DynamoDB. You must explicitly grant permissions. Example IAM policy in real AWS. You can see the code in our conversation history. This is like writing on the badge. Open quote, this person may enter the library, read books, and look at shelves. Close quote. Summary in one sentence. Your EC2 role, my role, needs a policy that grants permission to access the DynamoDB table. Without that permission, AWS blocks the request. If you'd like, I can now give you a practice question variation, a quick memory trick to remember this concept forever, a diagram showing how IAM roles, EC2 plus DynamoDB interact. Would you like any of those?
Okay, we chose option 2. And let's see how it goes. ጊዜ እየወሰደ ነው። እስቲ ኦኬ የነገር በደንብ እንትን እያለ አይደለም። let me do it again. ኦኬ ስለዚህ እየተጠየቅን ያለ ነው ባጭሩ ምንድነው ይሄ አፕሊኬሽኑ የተፈጠረው ከዳይናሞ ዲቢ ላይ ዳታ ሪድ እንዲያደርግ ነው። ግን ደግሞ ኢሲ2 ኢንስታንስ ላይ ራን አደረጉት ይላል። ከዛ አልሰራም ይላል። you're not allowed to do that action ይላል። ለምንድን ነው why is the app not allowed to access DynamoDB and how do we fix it? Okay, EC2 instance. Let me see. DynamoDB EC2 instance ላይ ነው ያለው ወይስ? Okay, real life analogy. Use the app want to enter library room. Okay, let DynamoDB table. The security guard at the door, AWS IAM, stops you. You show your ID card, IAM role attached to EC2. The guard checks your card and says, sorry, your ID does not give permission to enter this room. You must update the permissions on your ID card so you're allowed to access the library. EC2 instance is a computer or server you're using. IAM role is your badge or ID card. My role is the name printed on your badge. DynamoDB is the library where information is stored. Okay. DynamoDB ነው ማለት ነው ላይብራሪ። EC2 ኢንስታንሱ ደግሞ ያንን DynamoDB አክሰስ ለማድረግ የተጠቀመው ኮምፒውተር ነው ማለት ነው ወይም ሰርቨር። access denied ማለት the guard saying not allowed. Both of three ማለት you're told to talk to DynamoDB. What needs to be done? To solve the issue, you must give the IAM role or my role the correct permission to access DynamoDB. Correct set of actions. Add an IAM policy to the role, my role, that allows DB actions like get item, query, and scan. Attach this policy to the IAM role used by the EC2 instance. Make sure the policy includes the correct table name and region. AWS is secure by default. Just because EC2 instance has a role does not mean that the role automatically has permission to touch DynamoDB. You must explicitly grant permission. Allow, query, get, item, scan. Okay, summary in one sentence. Your role, EC2 role, my role needs a policy that grants permission to access DynamoDB table. Without that permission, AWS blocks the request. Okay, so all we need is a permission to the role. Let's see the options. A, create new IAM role with the necessary Amazon DynamoDB permission. Attach this IAM role as an additional role on the EC2 instance. create new IAM policy with the necessary Amazon DynamoDB permission. Attach this public policy to the my role IAM role. Okay. Run the AWS STS assume role command by using the my role Amazon resource name ARN. Obtain the access key ID and the secret access key from the output. Run the AWS configure command to store these values on the EC2. Query this thingy, my role, to obtain the access key ID and the secret access key. Run the AWS configure command to store this values of on the okay, so I believe it's gonna be this one. Why? Because we're just gonna create new IAM policy with necessary permission, DynamoDB permission, and then attaching this policy to my role IAM role, I believe. Yeah, and I'm correct. It's based on the ChatGPT answer we got. Okay, so why is the other answer not the answers? Creating a new IAM role with the necessary Amazon DynamoDB permission, attaching this IAM role as an additional role to the EC2 instance. This is incorrect because an EC2 instance or any AWS principal, service, or resource can only assume one role at a time. So creating another role will not work. Okay, and then creating a new IAM policy with the necessary Amazon DynamoDB permission. Attaching this policy to the my role IAM role is correct because access denied indicates an authorization error related to permissions. Multiple policies can be attached to a single IAM role. Okay. Multiple policies can be attached to single IAM role. C. Run the AWS STS assume role command by using the my role Amazon resource name. Obtain access key ID and the secret access key from the output. Run the AWS configure command to store these values on the EC2 instance. This is incorrect because access denied indicates an authorization error related to permissions, not an authorization problem caused by credentials. The API call is already authenticated. Accessing or modifying the location of AWS credential have no effects. The EC2 instance profile has already performed the assume role call because the role is already associated with the EC2 instance. How about the last option? The last option is incorrect because same reason. The access denied is about authorization related to permission. It's not about authentication caused by credential. Let's continue. So that question, we learned that we just need to give permission to the roles for it to access. Okay, let's see. Next, number 7, an e-commerce company deploys more than 20 services behind Amazon API Gateway. Who does what? E-commerce company deploys what? More than 20 services behind Amazon API Gateway. The interaction between services is complex. Each service can potentially call several others, making performance issues and errors difficult to identify. Some individual API calls have experienced slow response times. The development team needs to quickly identify the underlying cause of slowdowns. Which approach would most quickly identify the underlying cause of performance issues? It's usually related to auto-scaling or elastic load balancer or something like that. Let's see. Use Amazon CloudWatch metrics to find the service invocations with slow response time. Configure and use AWS X-Ray to examine these services to discover their performance issues. just trying to get fastest issue identification. B, use AWS CloudWatch logs to find service invocation with slow response times. Use AWS CloudTrail to examine these services to discover their performance issues. And then C is configure and use AWS X-Ray to find the service invocations with slow response times. Use Amazon CloudWatch metrics and logs to examine these services to discover their performance issues. D, use AWS CloudTrail to find the service invocation with slow response times. Configure and use X-Ray to examine the services to discover their performance issues. I believe it might be D because CloudWatch is kind of monitoring. Wait, is it monitoring? CloudWatch, like to see what happened. And CloudTrail, let's see, is more of to see who does, what happened, what time, kind of more detail. CloudWatch, if you just see, you're seeing your, I don't think it will let you do any actions. Okay, you have 20 roads or services. Let's see this. She's gonna read to us. We can follow along.
Think of it like this. You have 20 roads, services behind one big gate, API gateway, and cars' requests go in and then travel through different roads. Some cars are arriving late, but you don't know which road is slow. You need a tool that shows you the entire journey of each request, where it started, what services it touched, and exactly where it got stuck.
Okay.
Correct answer.
Okay.
Enable a
Okay, X-ray traces requests end-to-end across microservice, shows service map, visual diagram of who talks to who, highlights bottlenecks, slow services turn yellow or red, identify error, latency, and
AWS X-ray tracing on API.
in specific API calls, requires minimal code changes if integrated properly. This lets developers pinpoint which service is slow, which downstream
API gateway and the backend services. Why this is the best option. AWS X-ray traces requests end-to-end across microservices, shows a service map, a visual diagram of who talks to who, highlights bottlenecks, slow services turn yellow-red, identifies errors, latency, and exceptions in specific API calls, requires minimal code changes if integrated properly. This lets developers pinpoint which service is slow, which downstream dependency causes delays, whether the issue is API Gateway, Lambda, DynamoDB, EC2, etc. Short summary, problem solution, complex microservice interactions, AWS X-ray service map, hard to find slow API calls, end-to-end request tracing, need root cause fast, X-ray latency plus error insights. Memory trick. You can see the code in our conversation history. If you'd like, I can now give you a sample exam explanation format, a visual mental diagram for this scenario, a quick practice follow-up question. Which one do you want?
Okay, guys, I am coming. 1 minute. Let's do this. So, እንደገና ጠየቅናት. We're asking again, why not CloudWatch or CloudTrail? Okay.
Great question. Let's compare them clearly so you understand why X-ray is the right answer for performance troubleshooting and why CloudTrail and CloudWatch alone are not enough. First, what do these tools do? Amazon CloudTrail. Think of it as security CCTV logs for your AWS account. It records who did what and when, like API calls, IAM changes, console actions. helps with auditing and compliance, not performance. Good for detecting unauthorized access, tracking changes made by users or services, not good for finding latency problems. Amazon CloudWatch. Think of it as your health dashboard plus alarm system. Monitors metrics like CPU, latency, errors, logs, memory in some cases, can show that a service is slow but not why. Good for seeing latency charts, setting alarms when response times spike, cannot trace request paths across multiple services. AWS X-Ray. Think of it as a GPS tracker for every request. Shows the exact journey of a request through multiple services, pinpoints which service or call caused the slowdown. Best for distributed tracing across microservices, visual service map, root cause analysis of performance issues. Quick comparison table, feature, CloudTrail, CloudWatch, X-Ray PAM question, tracks user API activity, monitors metrics, logs, traces requests across services, identifies latency cause, partial, shows service map. Best for this exam question, yes. Why CloudTrail and CloudWatch are not enough here. The question says, many services, complex interactions, slow response times, need to quickly find root cause. CloudTrail will only tell you, open quote, API gateway was called at 2:01 p.m., close quote. CloudWatch will tell you, open quote, this API is slow, close quote. Neither will tell you which service caused the delay. AWS X-Ray will tell you, open quote, API service A, service B, service C. Service B took 4.2 seconds, root cause found, close quote. Final answer recap. To most quickly identify performance bottlenecks in a multi-service architecture, test it. And enable AWS X-Ray tracing on API gateway and all backend services. CloudWatch and CloudTrail are supporting tools, but X-Ray solves this question. Want a 10-second version to memorize for the exam?
ነው ግን በጣም ይበርዳል ፕላስ ወተት ትኩስ ወተት ፈለኩ ከዛ ደግሞ ምን ፈለኩ መሰላችሁ ጋዋኔን ፈለኩኝ ስለሚበርድ እሱን አመጣሁኝ ማለት ነው ኦኬ ሶ አም ባክ ስለዚህ ይሄ መልሱ ምንድነው የተጠየቅነው ነገር ከአማዞን API ጌትዌይ በስተጀርባ 20 ሰርቪሶች አሉና ከ20ው አንዳንዶቹም ባይሆን አብዛኞቹ ሊሆን ይችላል ወይ ደግሞ አንዳንዶቹ actually some individual API calls ነው የሚለው አንዳንዶቹ slow ናቸው ነው የሚለው የትኛው ነው slow ወይም ደግሞ ምንድነው ምክንያቱ የሚለውን ለማወቅ ከፈለገ በምንድነው የሚታወቀው X-ray ነው አንደኛው X-ray ነው ስለዚህ configure and use AWS X-ray to find the service invocation with a slow response time አብጠርጥሮ ስለሚያሳይ X-ray የቱ ጋር ምን ሆነ የሚለውን slow response time-ንም ያሳየናል ከዛ use Amazon CloudWatch metrics and logs to examine these services to discover their performance issue ሎጎችን እና ሜትሪክሶችን ደግሞ ያሳየናል CloudWatch ማለት ነው ኦኬ Unlike metrics or logs, X-ray can help users quickly identify services by their relative response times. X-ray can identify a poorly performing service from within a web of interacting services. Once identified, CloudWatch provides the context, including the logs and metrics necessary to study specific issues. Okay, CloudTrail አይደለም CloudTrail records API calls. CloudTrail is not an application log aggregator such as CloudWatch logs. Any API call that individual services make would not be likely to affect application performance. Let's continue. አሁን ዋናው የዚህኛው ዓላማ ኤግዛሙ ምን ይመስላል የሚለውን ለማየት ስለሆነ ፐርፌክት መሆንም አይጠበቅብንም ብቻ ስለምን እንደሚጠይቀው ምን ይመስላል ምን ያህል ኮምፕሌክስ ነው 1 2 3 ሰርቪሶችን አንድ ላይ አጠቃለው ነው የሚጠይቀውና እንደዛ ነውና አንድ ነገር ትዝ ያለኝ ደግሞ አሁን በዚህ ዘመን ChatGPT አልጠቀምም የሚሉ ሰዎች ትንሽ ወደኋላ ቀረት እያልን ነው ብዬ አስባለሁ። እኔም እንደዛ ከሚሉት ወገን ሆን ነበረ ይሄ ኤአይ ፕራክቲሽነሩን እንትን ባልወስድ ኖሮ በቃ በራሴ መስራት ነው የምፈልገው ዲፔንድ አልሆንም ብል ነበር። ግን አሁን ኤአይ አውቶሜት እያደረገ ለፍጥነት እየጠቀመ ኦርጋናይዝ ለማድረግ እየጠቀመ ነው። እኔ ሞር ያቀለለልኝ ምንድነው ለርኒንግን አቀለለልኝ። ለርኒንግን ኤኒዌር ይዤ መሄድ እችላለሁ። መኪናዬ ውስጥ ለርን ማድረግ እችላለሁ። የራሴን ጂፒቲ ኤጀንት ክሬት ማድረግ እችላለሁ። አንድ ኤሪያ ላይ ስፔሻላይዝ ያደረገ ማለት ነው። አንድ መጽሐፍ ፊድ አደርገዋለሁ። አንድ ሙሉ መጽሐፍ 200 300 ፔጅ ወይ 1000 ፔጅ ያለው መጽሐፍ ፊድ አደርገዋለሁ። ከዛ ውስጥ ኤኒ ጥያቄ እግረ መንገዴን እየነዳው ምን እያልኩ በድምጽ መጠየቅ እችላለሁ። ከዛ ሪፈር እያደረገ ትክክለኛ ኢንፎርሜሽን ያስተምረኛል። ራሱ ሰርች ያደርግልኛል፣ ዌብ ሰርች ያደርግልኛል። ብቻ ለርኒንግን ኢዚ አድርጎልኛል። አንዱ ደግሞ በአናሎጂ ንገረኝ እላታለሁ ወይም ቢግነር ነኝ እላታለሁ። ቢግነር ነኝ እስቲ እንደ አንደኛ ክፍል ተማሪ እንደ አምስተኛ ክፍል ተማሪ ሲባል በተለያየ ምሳሌ ኮንሰፕቱ እንዲገባ ማስተማር ይችላል ኤአይ። መጠቀሙ የተሻለ ነው። መጠቀሙ በተለይ ለለርኒንግ መጠቀም የተሻለ ነው። ለፕላጃሪዝም አለመጠቀም ነው። እንዳለ ኤአይ የሰጠውን ጽፎ ማቅረብ አይሆንም። በተለይ ለተማሪዎች አይሆንም። ግን በራሳችሁ ቋንቋ ይሄንን በራሳችሁ መጀመሪያ ትጽፉትና አይዲያዎቻችሁን ሁሉ እዛ ላይ ታስቀምጡትና አይዲያውን ኦርጋናይዝ አድርግልኝ ማለት ትችላላችሁ። ፕሩፍሪድ፣ ሰመራይዝ፣ ሾርተን እንደዚህ ሞር ብሬንስቶርም ሞር አይዲያ ጨምርልኝ ማለት ትችላላችሁ። የራሳችሁ እንዲሆንና እንዲመስል ማድረግ ትችላላችሁ። የራሳችሁን አይዲያ በመስጠት ሙሉ በሙሉ ከቻት ጂፒቲ ከመውሰድ መጀመሪያ ስለ ነገርየው አይዲያ ራሳችሁ ታመጡና ኦርጋናይዝ ያደርግላችኋል። አይኖ ኦርጋናይዝ ማድረግን ግራመርም ሁሉንም ነገር እኛው እንድንችል ነው የሚፈለገው። ዋናዎቹ ኤአይዎች እኛ ነን አይደለ? ሁሌ ደግሞ ሰዓት ላይ በቃ ይችላል። ፕለስ ያለውን ሪሶርስም መጠቀም መቻል ይኖርብናል። ኦኬ 8ኛ a developer has written several custom applications that read and write to the same Amazon DynamoDB table. What happened? ዴቨሎፐሩ ምን አደረገ? አፕሊኬሽኖችን ኦኬ አማዞን ዳይናሞዲቢ ቴብል ላይ መጻፍም ማንበብም የሚችሉ አፖችን አዘጋጀ ነው የሚለው። እሺ each time the data in DynamoDB table is modified, this change should be sent to an external API. Which combination of steps should the developer perform to accomplish this task? ለምሳሌ ራይት ሲያደርግ ወደ ሌላ ቦታ መላክ አለበት። ይሄ የተጻፈው ነገር ተጽፏል ብሎ ለሌላ ቦታ ኤክስተርናል ማለት ከኤደብሊውኤስ ውጪ ከላምዳ ውጪ ምናምን ሌላ ቦታ መጻፍ አለበት። ስለዚህ ምንድነው ሚሊዮን እንየው እስቲ። Enable DynamoDB streams on the table, configure an event in Amazon Event Bridge that publishes the changes to Amazon managed streaming for Apache Kafka, Amazon MSK data stream, create a trigger in the DynamoDB table to publish the change to an Amazon Kinesis data stream. ሄሊ መስሊህን ሊሆን ይችላል። ይሄ ሁለት ነው ነገሩ። develop and deliver the stream to an Amazon simple notification service topic and subscribe with the API to the topic. Configure AWS Lambda function to be triggered by the DynamoDB stream and call the external API. ይሄና ይሄ ሊሆኑ ይችላሉ። ይሄ ኪኔሲስ ዳታ ስትሪምን ወደ ሌላ ማስተላለፍ ላይቭ ማስተላለፍ እንደዛ ነገር ስለሆነ ኤክስተርናል ስለሚል እዚህ ጋርም ኤክስተርናል ስለሚል ግን ቀድመን እስቲ እኛ ቲዩተራችንን እንጠይቃት እዚህ ጋር
Let's break the question down first in simple language, then pick the correct choices. What is the question asking? You have a DynamoDB table. Several apps read-write to this table. Whenever the data changes, you want to notify an external API. Translation. Open quote, every time something is added, updated, or deleted in DynamoDB, automatically trigger a process that sends the new data to another API outside AWS. Close quote. So we need a way to detect changes in the DynamoDB table, a service that runs code API. Correct AWS tools for this DynamoDB streams equals security camera watching all changes. It records every insert, update, delete event. AWS Lambda, worker who reacts to these events. Lambda reads the event from the stream and sends it to the external API using HTTP call. Correct answer. Select 2. # enable DynamoDB streams on the table. This captures all changes made to items. Create an AWS Lambda function triggered by DynamoDB streams. Inside Lambda, write code to call the external API whenever a change occurs. Why these steps work? When an item in DynamoDB changes, 1. DynamoDB streams captures the event. 2. Lambda automatically gets triggered. 3. Lambda reads the changed data and sends it to the external API. No manual checking, no polling, completely automated. Summary like a story. Think of DynamoDB as a notebook. Every time someone writes or erases something, DynamoDB streams is like a camera recording the change. Lambda is like a messenger who watches the camera and immediately sends a message about the change to the external API. Final answer. Enable DynamoDB streams on the table. Create a Lambda function triggered by the stream to call the external API. If you'd like, I can now give you a sample Lambda code snippet that does this. Want it?
Let's see. Okay. Enable DynamoDB streams on the table. Correct. You can enable DynamoDB streams on a table to create an event that invokes an AWS Lambda function. Okay. Streams. ከዛ ሁለተኛው ደግሞ configure an AWS Lambda function to be triggered by the DynamoDB stream and call the external API. እዚህ ምንድነው እዚህ ላይ ዳይናሞዲቢው ላይ የሆነ ነገር ሲጻፍ መልእክቱ ተጽፏል ተብሎ ወደ ውጪ ወደ ሌላኛው API ያመላልግልን ስትሪምስ ዳይናሞዲቢ ስትሪምስ ነው። ምንድነው የሚያደርግልን ይሄኛው? ስትሪምሱ ክሬኤት ያደርጋ አን ኢቨንት ስትሪም ሲኖረው ዳይናሞዲቢው ስትሪም ሲኖረው ላይክ ኢቨንት ስትሪም ሆንኩኝ የሚል ኢቨንት ሄዶ ለላምዳ የሚናገር ዳይናሞዲቢ ስትሪምስ ነው ማለት ነው። ላምዳው መናገሩ ደግሞ ለምንድን ነው የሚያስፈልገው? እንደዚህ ሀፕን አድርጓል እንዴ ብሎ ሌላ ኤክስተርናል ለተባለው መልእክት እንዲልክ ያስፈልጋል ማለት ነው። እሺ 9 ካምፓኒ ሆስትስ ይሄ ረጅም ጥያቄ ነው። በስመ አብ ካምፓኒ ሆስትስ ኢትስ ዌብ አፕሊኬሽን ባክኤንድ ኦን Amazon ECS Elastic Container Service. The application's Amazon ECS tasks run behind an application load balancer. The application supports 3 environments: production, testing, and development. The application uses the ALB to route traffic to the correct environment. What happens? The application uses the ALB to route traffic to the correct environment. The company has configured 3 listener rules for the ALB to forward traffic to different target groups based on the port number. Port 80 for production and target group. Port 8080 for testing target group and port 8081 for development target group. The company decides to migrate the application backend to a serverless architecture by using an Amazon API gateway, Amazon API backend by AWS Lambda function. Company plans to use URI path pattern to access the desired environment instead of the port number. Company has created the Lambda function for the application backend. Each Lambda function has 3 aliases. Oh my goodness, what is this? A lot of questions here. አሁን ሄደን እና እዚህ ጋር ተዘጋጀልና ምንድነው የሚጠይቀን ብለን ፔስት እናደርግላታለን ማለት ነው። ጀማሪ ስለሆነ ምንም ስላልገባ ነገር ሁሉ አስረጅን እንላታለን። Okay. Let's see. Nice one. This is basically how do we replace ALB plus port with API gate. Wow. So that's what's that's more than this time.
Nice one. This is basically, how do we replace ALB plus ports with API gateway plus paths and Lambda aliases? Let's translate it to plain language first. Then I'll give you the exact steps. Hash, what's going on? Before ECS plus ALB, one ALB in front, 3 environments. Port 80 production, port 8080 testing, port 8081 development. The ALB uses listener rules plus ports to send traffic to the right target group. After serverless, they move backend to Lambda. There is an API gateway in front. Each Lambda function has 3 aliases: production, testing, development. They want to use URL path instead of ports, like /production, /testing, development. The question, what are the next steps to finish hooking this up? What they need to do. They now need API gateway routes that map path correct Lambda alias. In other words, open quote, if someone calls production / send it to the production alias of the Lambda function. If they call testing / send it to the testing alias, etc. Close quote. Correct high-level steps, what the right option would say. Create API gateway resources, paths for each environment. In API gateway, create a resource and method for each environment. For example, /production / proxy plus, /sting / proxy plus, /development / proxy plus. Lets you pass through the rest of the path, like production / orders, testing / users, etc. Integrate each path with the correct Lambda alias. For each resource method, set the integration type to Lambda. Use the Lambda alias ARN for that environment, /production. My function production - testing. My function testing. My function development. So you're not just pointing to the function, but specifically to the alias version that represents that environment. In Hash deploy the API, deploy your API gateway API, for example, to a stage like V1. Now you get URLs like https abc123.executeapi.region.amazonas.com /vproduction tps abc123.executeapi.region.amazonas.com /v1 testing ab23.23.execute.region.amazon.com v1 development / These replace what you previously did with ports on the ALB. Exam style summary. The right option on the exam would say something like, create separate API gateway resources, URI paths for /production, testing, and /development. Configure each resource's method to integrate with the corresponding Lambda function alias, production, testing, development, using the alias ARN. Deploy the API. If you want, next we can do a tiny spot the wrong answer exercise where I show you fake options, CloudTrail, ports on API GW, etc. And you tell me which are definitely incorrect. Great for exam muscle.
I'm not understanding the question at all. And I'm gonna say it. And then she's gonna come with all different ways of explaining it to me. Let's go and check.
No problem. Let's slow this down and make it super simple. Right now, you don't need the technical details. Let me tell you the story behind the question. The old system before migration. The company had a backend app running on Amazon ECS containers, 1 load balancer, ALB in front, 3 environments, production, real users, testing, test development, developers. They separated them using different ports. Port, environment, 80, production 880, testing, 8081 development. So the ALB checked the port number to know where to send traffic. If a request came on port 80, it went to production. If on 8080, it went to testing. If on 8081, it went to development. Hashtag the new system after migration. Now the company wants to stop using ECS containers, use serverless API gateway plus Lambda. Stop using ports to separate environments. Use paths in the URL instead. Example, you can see the code in our conversation history. They already built 1 Lambda function. It has 3 aliases. Aliases of versions. Alias meaning production, real version, testing, test version, development, developer version. Hasher, what is the question asking? Now they are asking, we moved from ALB plus ports to API gateway plus paths. What steps do we take so the correct API call goes to the correct Lambda alias? The correct steps, in human words. In API Gateway, create 3 paths. You can see the code in our conversation history. Connect each path to the correct Lambda alias. /production, Lambda alias production. Testing, Lambda alias testing. Development, Lambda alias development. That's it. Final meaning. You are replacing old way. Use ports to decide the environment. New way. Use URL path to decide the environment. API Gateway does not use ports, so you create paths and map them to Lambda aliases. Short answer summary. To finish the migration, create API Gateway resources and methods for production, /testing, development. Configure each API method to call the correct Lambda alias. Memory trick. You can see the code in our conversation history. Does it make sense now? If you want, I can draw a tiny diagram to cement it visually. Would that help?
Okay, which option includes the next steps of the company must take to complete the process? Create API Gateway API and configure the route to use Lambda proxy. Target the corresponding Lambda function Amazon resource. Okay. Lambda proxy. Where is it? Maybe this one. Maybe, yeah, wrong. So the answer was A. Create API Gateway API and configure the rules to use Lambda proxy integration. Target the corresponding Lambda function Amazon resource name that is concatenated with the expression stage variable Lambda alias. Modify the Lambda resource. Okay, guys, let's move on to the last one. Just this for now, and then we're going to continue next time. The other question, I did not understand what they're asking, so I'll pass for now. A company is working on a project to enhance its serverless application development process. The company hosts this application on Lambda. Development team regularly updates Lambda code and wants to use stable code in production. Which combination of steps should the development team take to configure Lambda function to meet both development and production requirements? Okay. Create new Lambda layer every time new code release needs testing. Create new Lambda version every time new code. Create two Lambda function. Maybe it's this one. Point the production to production ready. Lambda layer. Okay, let's see. This last one, and we're gonna be done for now. Okay, so we're just gonna copy paste this. Okay, I kind of see two people watching, but I don't know who it is. Would you let me know? እስቲ ስማችሁን ንገሩኝ በኮመንት ጻፉልኝ። ስማችሁን እየተከታተላችሁ ያላችሁ ከኔ ጋር እያጠናችሁ ያላችሁ እስቲ በኮመንት አሳውቁኝ ከየት እንደምትከታተሉና ስማችሁን ለወጣው። Thank you.
Let's break this down slowly so you understand what the question is really asking before we pick the right answers. What is the problem? The company uses AWS Lambda. Developers update the code frequently. They want developers to test new code safely, production to run only stable code, not experimental code, so they need a way to separate development code from production code. How do we do that in Lambda? Lambda gives us two features to solve exactly this problem. SHA versions. A version is a snapshot of Lambda code at a point in time. Once published, it cannot change. Great for production. Think of it like save a stable copy aliases. An alias is like a nickname that points to a version. Examples: dev alias points to the latest code. Prod alias points to a stable version that customers use. Aliases allow production to stay on trusted code, while developers test new code without breaking anything. Hash correct answers, select 2. Publish a new Lambda function version after testing code updates, so stable snapshots are created. Use Lambda aliases to point to specific versions for development and production environments. For example, prod alias version 5, dev alias version $latest. Why these are correct: feature, purpose. Versions: lock code so it cannot change. Production. Aliases route track to the right version, dev versus prod separation. Together, they provide a clean workflow. 1. Developers update $latest. 2. Test changes. 3. Publish a version. 4. Move the prod alias to the new stable version. 5. Customers now run only tested code. Hash your summary in one sentence. To meet development and production needs, publish versions of Lambda functions and use aliases to route production traffic to stable versions and development traffic to test code. Would you like a small diagram to visualize this workflow?
Create 2 Lambda function aliases, name 1 production, other development, production to production ready, Lambda and development to development point to production alias, production ready qualified analysis. Okay, let's just move on. Is confirming and moving. Oh, need to. Okay, so I'll just do this and then move on. Let's see. BND. Yeah. Okay, incorrect. BND. Name 1 as production, other as development. Point the production alias to production ready qualified ARN. Development alias to latest version. And B says create new Lambda function every time. New code release needs testing. Okay, guys. Have a good night or day, okay? Let me know your name. Let me know where you're watching an exam, prepping what exam you're getting ready. Let's get this done. Thank you.